What's up, gang? It's Mark with another episode of the Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast, the show that gives you the tips and tools you need to make yourself stronger and faster and harder to kill. You know, every culture has its heroes, but for the ancient Greeks, the hero wasn't just a man who fought bravely or achieved great things. He was something far greater. He was a mortal who strained against the limits of what it meant to be human. The hero in the dangerous space between a man and a god where strength, passion, and fate often collided. The Greeks looked to men like Achilles, Heracles, and Odysseus not just as figures of legend, but as living examples of what it meant to strive for greatness, to test the boundaries of mortality, and to meet the divine halfway. Their stories weren't just meant to comfort, they were meant to challenge. The hero's life was an ordeal, a crucible of suffering, glory, and in the end, transformation. For those walking on the warrior's path today, like soldiers, law enforcement, or just protectors and men seeking to live by a higher code, these ancient heroes still have something to teach us. They reveal what it means to live with intensity, to confront conflict without flinching, and to accept that excellence comes with a price. So in this episode, we're going to explore the figure of the Greek hero, not as a myth or metaphor, but as a model for how to live and fight with purpose in a world that's pretty much forgotten both. We live in a modern, secular, and fractured existence where those of us on the warrior's path can sometimes feel out of place and out of time in the world that we're living in. But these ancient stories have a surprisingly amount to say about courage, mortality, and how to live in a way that matters. So before we start, I just want to give a quick shout out to our premium subscriber members. I really appreciate your guys' support. If you would like to support the show, you can get access to over 100 episodes that are in the queue. Some of that exclusive members content only. So just for a few bucks a month, you can help us keep the lights on and keep us growing. So I really appreciate that. So without further ado, we're going to jump into it. We're talking about the Greek hero. It's all on Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast, and we're starting right now. All right, and welcome back to another riveting edition of the Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast, still recorded live in an undisclosed location south of the Mason-Dixon line. Let's get on with it, boys. We're talking about the Greek hero. So part one, I want to start with the model of the Greek hero. So in his book, The Greek Hero in 24 Hours, Professor Gregory Nagy reduces what could be a complicated tradition into a very useful type pattern for us. He highlights three features that keep reoccurring across Greek heroic narratives. And those I can't even talk. All right. And their features are not incidental or decorative. They're really central to what the Greeks meant by the word hero, and they are this. So number one, I'm going to walk you through his three-prong elements of the Greek hero, and then I'm going to talk about some examples from the literature, and then I'm going to give you like some practical like takeaways. So number one, the Greek hero is unseasonable. The hero is out of sync with ordinary human life. He lives at the wrong time, he dies at the wrong time, or his life otherwise refuses the ordinary rhythms and seasons of human existence. Do you ever feel like that? Do you ever feel like you're living in the wrong time, that maybe you wish you had lived in another time in the past? All right. If so, keep listening. Right. Number two, the hero is extreme. He's extreme in his behavior, in his emotions, in his consequences. He pushes the human capacities to their limits, whether they be strength, his fury, the endurance, his cunning, or even suffering. So whatever the measure, whether it's strength or cleverness, it's taken to a degree that ordinary life just cannot sustain. right? And then the third one, and really more interesting to me when I first came across this, was that in the Greek epics, the Greek hero tends to be antagonistic towards the god that is most like him. So this is one of Nagi's more striking observations. So what he's saying is that the hero tends to mirror a particular mythical god in capacity or character. But crucially, that God often becomes a source of trial or opposition or suffering for the hero. So the God, quote, most like him, unquote, is one through whom the hero's limitations are ultimately enforced. So I'll talk more about that as we go along. So those three characteristics together make the hero both inspiring and tragic, because spoiler alert, the hero usually dies at the end, right? So a human at the margin, pushing towards the divine, but never permitted to simply take up divine status without facing some kind of consequence. So the result is an intense, morally and psychologically rich figure whose life and death force their communities to face questions they could not otherwise handle cleanly. Like, what does courage mean in the face of unavoidable loss? What value is there in suffering for a cause? Or how does memory transform death into meaning, and many other things? We'll unpack all these as we go. But first, let's meet and refresh the three heroes that best show this pattern. So let's launch into part two. I'm going to analyze the characters: Achilles, Heracles, and Odysseus, and I'm going to take them in that order. So Achilles, this is the model hero of wrath and reconciliation. So Achilles, if you don't know, in the Iliad, Homer's Iliad, was the son of the mortal king Peleus, and his mother was a sea goddess, Thetis, making him part divine, but destined to live and die as a man. So from the start, fate hangs over this dude. So Thetis knew her son was doomed to die young if he went to Troy, but so that his name would live forever if he did. When the Trojan War breaks out, Achilles joins the Greek forces as their greatest warrior, knowing full well that this choice is going to cost him his life, right? So in the Iliad, Achilles isn't just a fighter, he's the center of the entire story, right? The poem begins with his wrath, actually. Those are some of the first lines. Like the first word is rage, right? Rage. It talks about his rage and his anger at Agamemnon, who insulted him. And from there follows the consequences as he withdraws from battle. He returns after the death of his companion, Patroclus. I can't even say these names, y'all. Patroclus or Patroclus. He kills Hector in revenge, and finally, in through the story, ends up reconciling with Hector's father, Priam. So through all this, Achilles embodies the hero as Professor Nagy defines him, living at extremes, out of step with ordinary life, and locked in a struggle with divine forces, especially Apollo, who ultimately brings about his death. So before I go further, those of you who are spun up on your Iliad may be asking, why is Achilles the model warrior in the ancient Greeks, and why not Hector? If you know in the story, so sometimes like when as a modern person, I'm going off script here, y'all, but as a modern person, like the first time I read the Iliad, I'm like, man, this Achilles guy just kind of seems like a whine baby. He's kind of pouting. He withdraws from the battle because basically Agamemnon insults him, and while the Greeks are just getting punished by the Trojans, man, and his buddies are like, dude, come out and help us, man, come out, we're dying here, and he's like, no, get bent, I'm not coming out there. And he just exhibits a lot of these what we would deem kind of like immature traits, and yet everyone in the ancient past idolized this guy. He was the model warrior. Meanwhile, Hector, who's on the Trojan side, This guy gets drawn into a war because his brother Paris steals Helen, right, from Greece and brings her back. That's the face that launched 1,000 ships, right? And Hector's fighting in this battle. Paris, his brother who caused all this, is like this kind of weak beta male that's just kind of hanging in the back, won't go fight for his people. And Hector is leaving his wife, his youngest, or his firstborn child, and he knows he's going to die when he faces Achilles. And he's fighting for king and country and all that stuff, man. He's super brave, and yet he's certainly the Iliad certainly reflects his heroism and certainly doesn't throw any shade on him by any means, but he's not the hero of renown that the Greeks idolized going forth through the ages. And he's loyal, he defends his home, he dies fighting for family and city, all that stuff. So that's kind of one question that I had, is why is Achilles the model warrior for Greeks and not Hector? And it really comes down to this, is that Achilles embodied the Greek heroic ideal as Nagy defines it. So Achilles lives at the absolute limit of human possibility. The guy is unstoppable. But he also fits those three prongs that we're going to talk about. He's unseasonable. He chooses a short and glorious life over a long, obscure, peaceful one. He's extreme in his courage, in his anger. When he grieves like no one else can. In everything he does, he's super extreme. And he's caught in that antagonism with Apollo, who's the god most like him. And so these elements together made him the paradigm of what a hero was for the Greeks. And if that's got you scratching your head, just hang on. We'll develop that out. The other thing is that he chooses kleos, which is the Greek word for immortal glory, over his own survival. So Hector fights for Troy because he has to, because that's his home. Very admirable, right? And very something that the Greeks and really most of your Indo-European cultures would hold that close to the heart, and we do even today. But Achilles chooses to fight even though he knows it's going to kill him. And that conscious embrace of death for the sake of eternal fame, right, imperishable glory, is what set him apart in the Greek mind. So Hector dies bravely. There's no discounting that. But Achilles dies heroically in the sense that the Greeks celebrated, facing fate directly and achieving immortality through song, through story, and cult, right? There was a cult of veneration and all that stuff that maybe I'll get into in another time. And the other thing is that he becomes larger than the war itself. So the Iliad really isn't about the Trojan War. That's just the backdrop. It's really about Achilles. It's about his wrath, this uncontrollable wrath, right? Giving way to his uncontrollable grief and his confrontation with mortality, right? And the entire poem begins and ends with him. So even the gods pay attention to him. So for the Greeks, he wasn't just another warrior, right? He's the hero par excellence, right? And the one whose story transcends the battlefield, right? After his death, Achilles receives hero cults across the Greek world, so worshippers believed that they could share in his blessings by honoring him. And Hector, for all his bravery, didn't become the center of the Greek hero cults. Achilles did. And that tells us how the Greeks themselves ranked these figures in terms of their lasting significance. So Hector represented courage and duty, no doubt. I'm a fan of Hector. I think he was a pretty cool character in the story. But Achilles represents the essence of a hero striving against fate. And that's why Greek warriors, even to the time of Alexander the Great, right, and Greek culture as a whole, held him up as the modern hero. So that's just kind of an aside. So I hope if you haven't, you will read the Iliad. You should. That's required reading from now on. So that's your assignment. You got to read the Iliad. But let's talk about Professor Nagy's three elements of the model hero, and you'll see how he fits, right? So unseasonable. Achilles faces this choice. He's got to stay home. He can stay home and live a long life. He can be, a peaceful life, but it's obscure, it's comfortable, or he can go to Troy, but he's going to die. and he's going to win immortal fame, but he's going to die young, right? So he chooses the latter. He chooses to go and fight, become glorious, but die young. And that choice itself makes him unseasonable, right? He refuses the normal cycle of living, aging, family life, and a quiet death. So he picks a life that burns hot and ends young. And as another aside, y'all, I've talked about, me and John Michael Greer had an episode that had nothing to do with myths, but where we talked about cyclical time. And I've mentioned that before, even when we talked about civilizational collapse. Especially in the pre-Christian worldview, like the idea of cycles, like that is deeply embedded into the worldview, into the milieu of the time. And so the heroes follow that pattern too, the cyclical pattern of birth, gaining their strength, reaching their zenith, but then being cut short, right, in the fury and the power and the zenith of their strength, right, and dying, right, and ending that cycle. They have to complete they have to complete the whole cycle, right? And then that gives birth into the hero cults, which maybe I'll do an episode on that, because if I do, that one deserves its own, so that you could see how the people interacted with these after the hero passed on, right, to the other side. So that's unseasonable. Extreme. Like I said earlier, Achilles' anger, the famous wrath that opens the Iliad, talking about his rage. It's not ordinary anger, it's an extreme visceral force. So he withdraws from the battle at Agamemnon's insult, and that causes real losses for the Greeks. And when he returns, it's not as a measured warrior, right, but almost a godlike force of destruction. I mean, the dude really turns into Godzilla on the battlefield. He is just crushing dudes and just destroying them, and just laying bodies to waste as he wades through the battlefield. He's extreme in both his capacity and feeling, right? He's the fastest. He's the most lethal. But he's also the most grief-struck when Patroclus dies. And he's capable of behavior that breaks the moral norms. Like, there's a scene when he kills Hector, right? Because Hector killed his best buddy, and Patroclus. And when he kills Hector, I mean, he doesn't just kill and gloat. I mean, he desecrates the corpse. He drags Hector's body around the city, for example. And even the other Greeks are just kind of in horror. And even during that time, that's just not something you did. That was kind of frowned upon. But again, that goes to Hector's extreme, right? So it's not that they necessarily look up to every single action or would model every single action that the hero does, but it's the essence. It's just how extreme and unbridled as a force he could be. That's what the draw is to them, right? And then, interestingly enough, this is the one I'm most fascinated about, is that he fits the third prong, which is he's antagonistic with the god that's most like him. And so Achilles is often read as bearing similarities with Apollo in terms of his youth, his beauty, all right, and his deadly precision, right? So the dude is young, he's virile, he looks good, right? It's one of the number one's rules, right? Always look good on the battlefield. And he just moves with deadly precision, right? Like an apex predator. And yet the terrible irony of the myth is that Apollo's agency contributes to Achilles' death. So Achilles models this pattern. He's like a god in terms of his power and strength, but ultimately he's checked or struck down by the very force of the divine, right? But Achilles' story is not only rage. There's a vital reconciliation arc too, is the grief for Patroclus, right? His buddy turns Achilles' energy and rage inward. And so when he meets with King Priam, which is Hector's dad, right? Hector's dad basically comes down to beg for Hector's body, right? For his son's body. And he can just see how crushed this old man is. This one man who at one point was at the zenith of his strength, right? When he was younger as a warrior, but now he's older, right? He's not as strong, he's not as virile. His life force is leaving him as he ages, and he's just crushed by the death of his firstborn, Hector. And Achilles breaks down and returns because as he, for the first time, right, he sees this crushed man, right, grieving over his son. And Achilles starts thinking about his home and his father and how his father is going to grieve for him. And he's able to relate, like where everything was just kind of about himself. Now he's able to step outside of himself and see and pity someone else. And so he shows that the hero's capacity to move from extreme wrath to human pity. And in doing so, it reveals why the hero's life matters morally. And this is the arc that Nagy reads as central to the heroic pattern. Very interesting stuff. Now, we could do a whole episode on Achilles. The guy is a very interesting character, very dynamic character in many different ways, but I got to move on. So I want to move to Heracles, or as the Romans called him, Hercules. So, in talking about his suffering, so we talked about rage and wrath with Achilles. Now we're going to talk about suffering and his labors and the Hera, the goddess Hera, the paradox with her. So, Heracles, right, is one of the most recognized figures of all in Greek myth and Roman too, right? But to the ancient Greeks, he wasn't just a strong man or monster slayer. He was the very embodiment of the heroic condition. So his story begins with a scandal in the heavens. So Zeus, the king of gods, falls for a mortal woman, one of many mortal women, right? But named Alcmene. And through his union with her, Heracles is born. And this divine parentage meant that he's stronger than most dudes. He's braver. He's more capable than any man alive. But it also comes with enemies because Hera, Zeus's wife, right? She catches wind of this, and her jealousy drives her to make Heracles' life a living hell from the get-go, right? A QUN. Think about this, Heracles and Hera. Do you see there? Heracles is cognate with Hera. So we already see a relationship. So I said earlier, antagonistic with the god most like them, but it can also be a goddess. And that's what we've got in this case. So she is like hot to trot to get this dude. And so as a young man, Heracles was known for his unmatched strength and courage, but Hera struck him with madness so terrible that he ends up killing his own wife and kids. And so when he comes to his senses, the grief from what he did, when he realizes what he did, it just about destroys him. So to atone for his crime, he's ordered to complete these 12 impossible tasks. And that's where you may have heard the famous labors of Hercules. There were 12 of them. And it ranges from killing the Nemean lion to capturing Cerberus. That's the dog. I think that's the three-headed dog that guards the underworld, right? The Hellhound himself, and many others. And along the way, he wrestles with monsters. With death. He's pushed to the edge of the known world outward. But as he does, though, and he's conquering these, he's making it safer for mortals, right? He's bringing order to the chaos, right? But his life never really escapes tragedy. So he fought with kings and gods and fate itself, and often finding himself at odds with the divine powers that are shaping his life. But his death came not in battle, but through treachery. When he puts on a poison robe given to him by his wife, thinking it's a love gift or charm. And the poison burns him alive. And Heracles built his own funeral pyre, and he climbs onto it willingly. But this was not the end for Heracles. The Greeks believed that he was taken up to Olympus itself, where he became a god, marrying Hebe, and the goddess of youth, right? And that is all like in the second episode that I did with John Michael Greer when we talked about these myths. These myths are not to be read as historic, right? If you read myths as historic, you're gonna get into trouble because you're like, man, this don't make any sense. Like, why would someone do that kind of stuff? It's like, no, like these things, the people, the characters, their actions even are typically metaphors for something. They're lessons about something. They're symbols. They represent things, right? So for the Greeks, Heracles wasn't just a hero, he was a hero who suffers but endures and ultimately transcends. He goes beyond, right? And he lived at the very edge of what it meant to be human. And that's exactly why the Greeks revered him. In fact, the Spartans considered him their divine ancestor, meaning that they came from him. They were his spawn, so to say. Not uncommon in the ancient world. All right, the Germanics had the same thing going on. It's pretty pervasive throughout the Indo-European world, right? So Heracles embodies the superhuman side of the Greek model. So if Achilles shows the tragic, short-lived life, short-lived glory of the warrior ideal, Heracles shows limitless strength and endurance that the Greeks associated with the heroic age. So he wasn't just strong, he was the strongest mortal that ever lived. But like Achilles, his strength comes with extremes, violent rage, extreme suffering, and a life filled with pain and trial. And Nagy emphasizes that Greek heroes exist in that space, that liminal space between gods and men. So they're kind of a mix. They don't get to do all the things that gods do because they're men, but they have extreme strength and powers that the rest of us don't have. But we can relate to them because they have some of the same weaknesses that we do. All right. And they often fall prey to those. And that's what I love about them, is because even though they have that divinity within them, they're very human, right? They fail, they fall on their face, they feel pain like we do, and they die just like we do, right? And so Heracles fixed this perfectly. He's the son of Zeus, yet he's immortal. He's capable of godlike feats. Yet he's doomed to suffer and die before he's eventually reborn into immortality. Right. So his life centers on heroic labor and suffering. So what sets him apart isn't just his power, but it's how he uses it. He accepts impossible tasks. Like, all these labors are designed for him to fail, and he just smashes through them. Like, he kills the Nemean lion, he cleans out the Aegean stables, he captures Cerberus, who's guarding the underworld, right? The door to Hades, the door to death, right? He captures this creature. And in doing so, he becomes mythically the civilizer of the world. He pushes back chaos and monsters to make it habitable for mankind. But he doesn't get this life because he wants it, right? He's not volunteering it. It's Hera, out of jealousy towards Zeus's illegitimate child, curses him with madness that leads to the death of his own wife and children. So his labors are done out of penance, meaning that his heroism grows out of divine wrath, divine grief, and atonement. So he bridges the mortality and divinity together. So Heracles dies a mortal death. Right? He's burned alive on a pyre after putting on this poison shirt of Nessus, but then he transcends to Olympus as a god. And that transition is crucial in Greek thought, because the hero suffers to the utmost, but ultimately transcends human limits, right? And this is why hero cults for Heracles spread everywhere. He represented the human condition pushed to its breaking point, and also represents that the hope of becoming more than human at the very end of it, right? And so those who venerated these heroes would come and vicariously, through venerating, through coming to the shrines, giving offerings and stuff like that, they would share in that. And again, I probably should do one just on the hero cults, because there's a lot of reciprocity back and forth that the ancients believed in, right? That it's really interesting, right? All right. And then finally, his story resonates through Greece because Achilles embodies the warrior's tragic choice. Heracles shows that endurance through suffering can lead to glory and immortality. Right? I'm going to say that again because that one's pretty important. Right? So Heracles shows that endurance through suffering can also lead to glory and immortality. And that combination of strength, of struggle, and eventual divinity made him a cultural model for perseverance and ultimate triumph, even when cursed by fate or the gods themselves. And I think all of us at some point in your life are going to feel like you've been cursed by fate. And so that's why when you run through a rough patch, a few months ago, I was living in the Hurt Locker not too long ago, and I was leaning pretty hard on some of these stories, right, to get me through it, because that's my model, right? And it explains to me, it's my worldview, right? It helps me understand, categorize, and put it in a framework that I can process what's happening to me so that I can transcend it, that I can push through it and endure and gain the things that I need to become and emerge stronger, right? And it can be the same for you too. But you have to know these stories. Me going through these and giving you cliff notes is not enough. It's just like when John Michael Greer and I were talking about the Grail legends, right? And talking about mythology, you have to immerse yourself in these stories. You have to know them like the back of your hand and let them seep into your soul. And when you do that, you will be truly amazed at the power that these stories can give you, because that's why our ancestors told them. These are stories that were shared among the warrior class for this reason. All right, so let's see how Nagi's model fits Heracles. And I will say, I can't recall if I think he did talk about Heracles. It's been a minute, but since I've read the book, but I pulled Heracles just because he's so famous. But I do think he did spend a little bit of time on Heracles. So let's just move into it. So unseasonable. So Heracles never simply takes up an ordinary life, right? He doesn't get to have an ordinary life. Even when he marries and rules, misfortune strikes. So his vigor places him always at the edge of ordinary household rhythms, right? His life is a series of violent and extraordinary events, right? He's out of time. He's out of time with the rhythms of life, right? He gets married. He's had kids. He's not looking to cause any static with anybody, but it finds him, right? And there's really nothing he can do to have a normal life because Zeus's jealous wife is on his 24/7, right? So that's what makes him unseasonable. His extreme. So he's incredibly strong. He's extreme in his violence. He's extreme in his melancholy and his penitential toil, right? So because he does this extreme thing, even though he was cursed with the mind virus sent to him by Hera, right? He takes the responsibility for what he did, even though it wasn't intentional, but he has to rectify that. So he takes on these extreme labors, right? And these labors themselves, right, are slaying monsters, cleaning impossible stables, fetching Cerberus from the underworld. It takes him to the limits of human capacity. And that's what your struggles and your trials are going to do for you. They're going to take you to your limits. They're going to take you to the extremes. Sometimes life will do that. And these are your models, right? To help you understand what is happening. And antagonistic towards the god most like him. So Hera, like, this is crucial and often misunderstood oversimplifying family ties, right? Because Heracles is the son of Zeus. He bears Hera's name in a way, and his very name is tied to Hera's glory. Remember when I said that word kleos, which is immortal glory, right? Earlier, that Achilles was striving for. So his name is cognate with Hera. Hera, that's the first part of his name, and kleos, or Heracleos, right? So he already, his name is significant, and you can see that his name is tied to Hera's glory. Yet it's Hera who is persecuting this dude relentlessly. She sends snakes in his infancy, right, to try to kill him. She drives him mad so that he kills his own family and sends him on this odyssey of these labors. And her antagonism, though, is the engine that drives the narrative, right? Why does this pattern exist? Because the goddess he's most like or implicated in the hero's life becomes the force that subjects him to trial, right? The hero's proximity to the divine produces suffering by way of testing, and through the suffering, he is reshaped, right? Through suffering, you are reshaped, right? If you allow it to be, right? To do that to you, if you allow it, right? If you engage in it, if you partner with the suffering, if you partner with the trial, right? You can allow it to reshape you and to strengthen you, or you can let it crush you, right? That's really the only options we have, right? You can sit there and die and be crushed by it, or you can assault through, right? That's basically your options. Just like a near ambush. All right. So in the end, Heracles dies in grievous pain from a poisoned garment, right? And the catch is that his death is the enactment of suffering, right? Even at the very end, he suffers. Then because of his labors and merit, he's received among the gods. And eventually gets reconciled with Hera, but we'll leave that for another time. And so his death and ascension circle is one of the key features of the Greek heroics, right? The hero's death is not simply obliteration, but it's the gateway to the hero's transformed status, right? And so again, if you look at that as a model of your own life, right, that is the model for you. It's not when you undergo suffering that crushes your spirit and soul, there's in a sense of you, a part of you that dies, and a stronger version, or it's an opportunity for a new and stronger version for you to emerge, reborn in a certain way, right? With a new status, a new sense of strength, a new skill set, a new experience, right? That makes you stronger, more formidable, right? And so you will do this many times in your life, right? If you are brave enough to get off the couch and put the remote control down and start pursuing things that are meaningful in your life, right? You will face this, and you will face this cycle over and over again. Right? You're not going to face it exactly like these heroes did. That's why they're larger in life than life, right? Is as that extreme example, right? But you are funneling that in your life at your level. All right, let's move on to Odysseus, right? Odysseus is a different kind of hero, right? I mean, the dude is strong. He's a warrior. He cut down a lot of people in the Trojan War. But even though it's his cunning, though, that Homer really prizes and pays a lot of attention to. Don't forget, Odysseus is the one who came up with the idea of the Trojan horse, right? Hey, let's create this wooden horse as a war prize. Trojans pull it into the city. What they don't know is that we all climbed up into it. And then when they're all partying and passing out, then we come out the back door and start mowing people down. All right, so Odysseus, he was the king of Ithaca, and he's a different kind of hero, like I said, from Achilles and Heracles. He was strong, right? But he's not known for unmatched strength or divine rage, but for what the Greeks would call metis, metis, his cunning, his wit, his resourcefulness. And the Greeks saw him as the cleverest of all men. He's a hero who could survive through intelligence when brute force fails. And you get a whole lot of that in the follow-on epic of the Odyssey, which is his 10-year journey to make it back home. So during the Trojan War, Odysseus was like the key strategist. He was the mind behind like I said, the famous Trojan horse, right? But his real story begins after the war in the Odyssey, in Homer's Odyssey, where he spends 10 years trying to get home. He's facing storms. He's got monsters trying to eat him. He's got temptations from hot goddess women, all that stuff, and even facing the wrath of the sea god Poseidon. And so what sets Odysseus apart is his endurance, right? He outwits sorceresses, right? Um, these chicks are wielding magic, right? But he can't wield magic, but he's got his mind, he's got his wits, and so he outwits them. He blinds the Cyclops. He resists the song of the sirens, right? These are these smoking hot nymphs that are on the cliffs that are singing the song, and sailors or people on their ships look and they just get captivated by these gals, and they just run their ships on the rocks and die out to sea, right? He can withstand them. He resists them, right? And he even walks through the land of the dead, but he never stop. Yeah, for real, true story. He like real talk. He goes into Hades and then he comes out, but he never stops fighting to return to his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus, right? For the Greeks, he embodies the cleverness under pressure, right? He's got that grace under pressure and the will to keep going no matter how long it takes, no matter how high the cost is. This guy has no quit in him. All right, so Odysseus, let's look at him through the three elements of Professor Nagy. So Odysseus is at the wrong time, right? He's unseasonable. It plays out in a protracted absence from home. So what are we talking about that? He survives Troy and its glories, but when everybody else gets in their ship and goes home, right? And they return home as heroes for those who survived, not Odysseus. He is out of time. Instead of returning home as a glorious king of Ithaca, as he should have, he's forced on a 10-year-long detour, right? And it returns him and it delays him from the return to his household and the stability of a normal life. So this unseasonality, right? Instead of the normal arc, like I said, of a successful warrior returning to peace and family, right? Odysseus is made to live outside that rhythm for 10 years, right? That's what makes him unseasonable, right? He's taken out of the rhythm of what is normally expected in life. So he's extreme. The extremity here is is psychological and existential. So Odysseus undergoes the horrors that stretched beyond the regular human resilience. So he loses his men. He's being tempted by Circe, the sorceress, and Calypso. He's facing the Cyclops, wanting to eat his dudes and all that stuff, journey into the underworld. The emotional and moral stakes, the endurance required to keep one's identity intact, right? The core of who you are when you go through such trials. That is an extreme quality. How many people have you known that have gone through extreme loss, extreme trials, extreme suffering, and were never the same, but not in a good way, right? It wrecked them purposely or permanently almost, right? A tragedy that they can't recover from, right? The loss of a loved one, right? The loss of fortune, right? Or whatever it is, the loss of health, right? And those things that they emerge, they're forever embittered, forever grief stricken and depressed. They can't rise out of what happened to them, right? But not Odysseus, right? He suffers and endures through, and he uses his wits to get him through. So antagonistic with the god most like him, that's Poseidon. There's also maybe a trickster figure there, Hermes, right, which can sometimes act as a trickster figure. So he shares traits with Hermes, the trickster and liminal god, in terms of his cleverness, movement in between worlds, his speechcraft, that kind of stuff. But it's really Poseidon, the god who rules the sea. That's the one Odysseus must cross, and who is most directly provoked by Odysseus. Why? Because he blinded the Cyclops, which was one of Poseidon's sons, right? And so when he does that, he becomes the chief antagonist. So the pattern holds. The god who exerts the greatest pressure on him is also the god that shapes what his life must endure. So Odysseus's cunning doesn't exempt him from painful trials. It makes his story into a long test of identity, maintaining the core of who he is, and endurance. So there's an added value in Odysseus's pattern. His extreme cunning combined with his suffering gives us a model of heroic endurance that is internally lived. So the hero, what's cool about Homer's Odysseus character is it's not just about him battling heroes outwardly, but it's the inward battles that he's facing, right? Having to maintain his force of will, right? His moral and personal courage and the core of his being, right? Of to make it home and return as the man who left, right? And not some bittered, crusty, crumpled up, garbage of a human being, right? All right. Let's talk about part 3. Why must heroes die? If you noticed, Odysseus doesn't die in the Odyssey, but he does die in myths, right? And if you look at, we've talked about Beowulf before, Achilles dies in the Trojan War, Heracles dies and ascends to Olympus. Just about every epic story, even in current days, right? You watch Braveheart, right? William Wallace dies. I mean, most of the time the hero dies, and it's like, why is that? Why does the hero have to die in the end, right? Well, let's talk about that. So again, remember what I talked about cycles and what these guys represent. Their actions, who they are, their personalities, even their names are symbols that represent something. So death will represent is a symbol for us to unpack and to consider as we expose ourselves to these stories. So in Professor Nagy's framework, the Greek hero is unseasonable in life, right? Meaning he's never quite in rhythm with the natural or social order. So like I said earlier, Achilles is too young to die, but die he does, right? He's just too intense for ordinary human life, right? He burns too hot. Heracles is the being of such force that he continually disrupts the balance of the world. And Odysseus is forever restless, right? He can't stop until he gets home. So this unseasonableness is what makes them extraordinary, but it also means they can't remain in the world indefinitely, right? Their excess energy, their extremeness is destructive as long as it's contained within the mortal bounds of the body. It distorts the order of things. You just can't have a guy like that. Reality can't contain someone like that, right? So death then is not just an end, it's the way they are transformed and put in their rightful place. So in dying, it's at death of the hero that he becomes seasonable, right? However you want to say it, right? That's when that happens. He enters the natural order that he was at once at odds with. So his power, once dangerous and disruptive, is transfigured into something that nourishes the community, right? So his myth, his ritual presence becomes a source of sacred energy for those who venerate him. Or that's how it worked in the ancient world. So you think about Achilles. In life, his wrath threatens to unravel the Greek army, right? If you read the story, I mean, his rage and wrath was out of control, and it was jeopardizing the mission. He was just too fierce and too absolute as a force of nature. But in death, he then becomes a force of balance. So his tomb itself becomes a sacred site where warriors would honor him, draw courage, and seek his protection. So his fury is no longer creating chaos. It's actually becoming a channel of divine power that these warriors of old would then channel within themselves and take it out to the battlefield with them. And that's what Nagy means when he says that the hero reaches maturity in death, right? He reaches balance, right? These extreme attributes of the hero then is brought to bear, right? And under control and brought to order at death. So the hero in life, just like a storm, right? Overwhelming, uncontrollable, brilliant, but destructive. But in death, his life becomes like rain, right? It's a source of renewal for those who come afterwards, right? So for Greeks, the hero's death is the point in which he joins the cycle. He becomes, in a sense, a part of the seasonal rhythm, right? Birth, struggle, death, rebirth, that eternal pattern that we've talked about before. And that's why heroes, Professor Nagy says, are quote unquote blessed after death. So their power becomes integrated with the sacred order through ritual. Those who venerate them then participate in that blessing. So in mythic terms, this makes profound sense because the hero story mirrors the cycles of nature. So like a seed, he's got to fall to the ground to bring new life. His death feeds the life of the polis, or that's the Greek word for the community, just as the fertility of the land depends on death and rebirth of its seasonal god. So when Nagy says that the hero becomes seasonal in death, he means the hero finally becomes one with the order of things. His extremity is reconciled, right? His unseasonableness is healed. He's no longer out of rhythm. He becomes the rhythm of life, right? And those who venerate him in these hero cults of antiquity, right, would participate in this story. They would share in that reconciliation. They would draw from his death, not despair, but renewal, right? This assurance that even when things are unseasonable, right, even what's too much for this world, we can find that place in the great pattern of life and time. So in death, in Greek culture, death is the boundary that separates mortal fate from the potential of posthumous honor. So the heroic pattern isn't simply, live heroic deeds and then keep on living. The hero's death is the point where human excellence is transmuted into something communal and enduring. This can kind of be hard for our modern brains to get a hold of, but it's something that if you wrestle with, especially if this is your first time being exposed to it, it's hard for a modern to get their head wrapped around it. But this is important to understanding warrior cultures of old and what was so important to them and how they used that and how that gave them strength to found these great kingdoms, right? To do like the Spartans, to do the mighty things that they did, that charged Alexander the Greek to conquer the known world, and many others after him, right? And then there's things that we can get out of that too, even though we live in a secular age that doesn't value these things anymore, right? And I'll get to that. So for the ordinary warrior listening to the Iliad in the Bronze Age, the stories of Hercules or Achilles, for instance, that's not just entertainment. That was a mirror of their own fears and longings. Every warrior knew he could die tomorrow. And in truth, a lot of them would die anonymously, right? Their families would mourn them. Their comrades would remember them for a time, but within a few generations, their names would vanish. And in Greek thought, this fading into obscurity was a death in of itself, right? Maybe worse than actually physically dying. So the great heroes of epic offered an answer to the dilemma. Achilles especially became the model of the warrior who does not fade. His deeds were immortalized in the kleos, right? In his imperishable fame. And to die with your name sung by poets was to cheat time itself, in a sense. So that was the promise that the epic song dangled before the audience. Not that everyone will become Achilles, but that you might live in such a way that your death demands remembrance. And not all warriors would reach that height, right? They might fight bravely, even heroically, and their name still forgotten. But the epic poetry and later hero cults that allowed communities to elevate a select few, they made them a stand-in for the many. And so these warriors, by bonding themselves to Achilles to live like him, right, to share in him, in a sense, they would share in his death, but share in his afterlife as well, in a certain extent, right? And that's why these hero cults, I think, sprung up. So Achilles' glory became a kind of shared inheritance and a model that gave shape and meaning to the courage of all who fought. So the lesson for the young warriors wasn't you'll be Achilles. It was live as if you could be. Strive for greatness, even knowing the odds are against you. Because even if your name is not carried forward, you participated in the same heroic ideal, right? You stood in the stream of courage that defined what it meant to be human in the face of mortality. That's a mic drop right there. If you meditate on that, right? And this is why the death of the heroes mattered as much as their lives did, right? Their death is the moment their humanity is crystallized into something that is more than mortal. The hero dies, but the story doesn't. For the warrior who lived with death as a constant companion, this is both the consolation and the challenge. You can't escape death, but you can choose how you meet it. And in that choice lies a chance to outlive time itself, right? Big stuff, big stuff. So let's talk about the heroic model for modern warriors, for modern times, for you and me. So let's talk about number one, being unseasonable, a man out of step with his age. Like I said, the Greek hero is unseasonable. He doesn't fit the time or the place that he lives in. Achilles was too young to die, yet he was destined to do so. Heracles acts before his time, upsetting the order of things. Odysseus, even when he returns home, he doesn't fit among ordinary men, right? He's bigger than that. And in modern life, unseasonableness looks like the man who can't fully belong in the world as it is, right? He feels misaligned with the times. Do you ever feel like that? Right? Maybe he values honor. Well, instead, let's take it out of the third person and put it in the first person, right? Do you value honor? Do you value duty? Do you value truth in an age that is obsessed with safety, comfort, convenience, and cynicism, right? Do you feel out of step with the age that you live in? Because that, if you do, if you're on the warrior path, you should. It's part of the package, right? And that will create a tension within you, right? That you are out of step within the world that you live in, right? Where you don't 100% feel like you belong here. And that creates that tension, but it is also the mark of authenticity, right? To live heroically today, if you are going to do that, you have to accept this of being out of season. And you will be out of season for as long as you take breath in and walk this earth, right? You live by an older rhythm of courage and integrity, even when the culture that we live in mocks it or has forgotten why it matters. And don't make no mistake, we need this now in our day and age more than ever, but the world has forgotten about it. The world has gone to sleep and does not want to be woken up, right? But that's where we find ourselves. So you can see this in even like the military and law enforcement cultures that still uphold these ideals of service and sacrifice, right? Concepts that a wider society has often struggles to understand. And really, quite frankly, even the military is forgetting these things. But the heroic man today is not unseasonable because he's maladjusted, right? That's not what makes you unseasonable, is just because you don't feel like you fit in. He's unseasonable because the age itself has lost memory of what a seasonable life means. Does that make sense? Right? Number two, right? Extreme. The man who refuses mediocrity. The Greek heroes were extreme, like I said, in strength and in their emotion and their action. Achilles loves and hates beyond measure. Heracles performs impossible labors that test the limits of human endurance. Odysseus pushes his cunning and endurance to the breaking point, right? For the modern man, extreme, be very careful about this, doesn't mean living recklessly or destructive, but it means finding your values and living them without compromise in a world that rewards safe, the tepid, right, and the conformist. It means pushing the boundaries of courage and mastery and self-discipline. And that will set you apart from others, right? Just the fact that, I mean, I tell you what, y'all, in today's age, if you work out, if you care about what you put in your body and you hold down a stable job and are faithful to your spouse and raising your kids, that will make you an anomaly just in and of itself, right? Some people would find that extreme, right? But so that's where we are. Every warrior trains when others rests, or you take up a responsibilities when others are passing the buck, right? When you are willing to risk adversity rather than avoid it, right? That is channeling part of that heroic extremity, right? You're not going to slay the Nemean lion, right? But you will slay the lion and the dragons within your own life, right? Your own internal dragons that you have to face, right? The ancients would recognize that intensity of a purpose of as the mark of a man striving for arete, right? And we've talked about that before, right? That is the excellence in all things, right? The danger, of course, is that extremeness can be self-consuming, right? Eventually the hero is consumed by his extremity, right? So the hero has to learn to wield his intensity rather than being consumed by it, right? And that's the balance, right? That separates heroism from hubris. And so that's the lesson from us as we look at these stories. These heroes meet their maturity in death, right? Because of their extremity, right? Death is what brings that balance. That's what closes the cycle. In your life and in my life, we're not looking for a physical death to do that. We're looking for, like I said, metaphorical deaths, right? Where we die to an old part, an old dysfunctional part of ourselves, a part of ourselves that's not serving us, right? We die to that, and then we become renewed in the vigor of a new strength, of a new skill set, of a new experience that makes us stronger, more capable, right? And then we take that forward, right? That's what we're looking for here. All right. And then how about this one? Where does number 3 fit in for you? So antagonistic toward the God most like him, towards the God most like you. This is the hardest and most profound of Nagi's elements, right? Every hero, he says, is locked in a conflict with the god who most resembles him. So Achilles mirrors Apollo, right? Radiant, youthful, handsome, but deadly, right? And yet they oppose each other. Heracles reflects Hera, right? His very name, like I said, means the glory of Hera, yet she persecutes him endlessly. Odysseus parallels Poseidon, right? The god of the seas, right? And Odysseus is on this boat forever trying to get back home, right? And Poseidon is just smashing him every step of the way. But both are masters of unpredictability. Think about the seas shifting power, right? Yet Odysseus endures Poseidon's relentless wrath. So translated in the modern world, this antagonism symbolizes the inner conflict between a man and his own potential divinity, right? And, or your spirit, right? Between you and that highest virtues of you within your spirit, right? Between what he is and what he could become, right? So today, it's the tension between the life you're living and the life you sense you were meant to live. I can't tell you how many times I'm pretty much off the road now, but I was on the road for about 12 years doing training for law enforcement, military guys, a lot of civilian gigs and things like that, a whole bunch of different kind of, training. Oftentimes I would get dudes coming up to me on the breaks and being like, man, they've got a distinguished career. They got a career that they like, but they're just like, man, I feel like, what's the next thing? I feel like there's something there. Like, what should I do? What do I do? That kind of thing. And so that in and of itself is a battle against your own shadow. It's against your own ego. And when I say ego, I don't mean that in a bad way, like an arrogance kind of thing, like the ego has kind of taken on some some meanings that I don't mean that when I say ego, but I'm just talking about your own self, your own limitations. So the quote, God most like you, unquote, might be the ideal version of yourself. That's what it is in these stories, right? Apollo is the ideal version of Achilles, right? Which is the model for the ancient Greek warrior, right? So it's the God most like you is the ideal version of yourself. And that is going to be at war with you because that's the ideal version you're trying to reach, but you're inhibited, right? You're buffeted. You have things that are in your way, right? You have a life rhythm that has to be changed, that you're going to have to step out of it, right? And maybe pursue something different. And that's going to take some discipline. That's going to take some courage, right? And that's why it's antagonistic towards you and you feel unsatisfied, right? Because there's that aching and that longing that is wrestling with you, and it's not going to give you rest until you overcome it, until you prevail against it. And what that looks like for you, I don't know. It's going to be different for everybody. You know, I could tell you a laundry list of the things that have happened to me, but I'm not your model for that, right? I'm not, you don't want to live my life. You have to go live your life, right? And so what I'm saying is it's the same template, it's the same concepts, but it's going to take you in a different way up the mountain than the way that I went. So the struggle against that God is to evolve in yourself, right? Every hero has to confront his mirror. And that's what these stories, these gods represent. They are a mirror to the hero, right? That he has to, it's a part of himself he has to overcome, just like it is with us. And the greater the likeness, listen to this though, the greater the likeness, the more fierce the conflict is going to be. Right? The more the harder that ache in your heart and soul, then that's the bigger dragon you're going to have to face and deal with. And it won't go quietly into the night. Right? You're going to have to do battle with it. So let's wrap it up, y'all. This one went kind of long. In the modern world, the sacred has been flattened into the profane. Right. So these three elements of these heroic patterns, unseasonability, extremeness, antagonism, right? These things, the modern day cannot accept. The modern worldview cannot even relate to this stuff, right? But for those of us who can understand it, right, and understanding it and appreciating it fully may take some time for some of us, but it becomes a kind of map for how a man can live with purpose in an age that has lost the power of myth, right, or its connection to myth. So unseasonability reminds us that being out of step with our time may actually be the surest sign that we're on the right path, right? To hold standards of honor, courage, and truth in a culture that rewards comfort and conformity is to live life like our ancient ancestors did, right? Out of season, but true to something that is real and something that is eternal. Extremeness calls us to reject mediocrity, full stop, right? To live fully, even dangerously, not recklessly, in pursuit of meaning, right? The hero never seeks balance for his own sake. He seeks fullness, the intensity and the edge where life is most real. Like I said, that does not mean recklessness, but it means refusing to coast through life half awake. And antagonism, this is the constant struggle with the God most like us. It forces us to wrestle with our own higher nature, and it demands that we confront that divine image within, right? Not to worship or venerate it from afar, right? That tension between what we are and what we could become is the engine for transformation, right? The Greek hero was never meant to be comfortable. His life was an ordeal. It was a crucible through which he was remade. And for men today, the same pattern holds true. If you would take up the warrior path, that will hold true. The battlefield may not be Troy, right? But the war's still being fought in the soul and every single day. And that, my friends, will do us for the Greek hero. I'm going to see how this one lands. If you would, let me know in the comments. Shoot me a message on Substack or however you want to get a hold of me. I will do one on the Germanic side. I'll probably do it anyway, but let me know how this lands and if it resonates with you, if you found value from it. I need to know that, or I'm just going to keep doing the 3 steps to make your dry fire practice better, or, low light stuff. We still do those, but if you want this, to me, this is where it's at, right? It is combining the mindset with your practical skill to truly make you a warrior, right? A warrior, not by today's standards, not by what Instagram or YouTube videos tell you what a warrior is, not what the current culture tells us, but how our ancestors saw themselves, right? That we're closer to it, right? The mental, psychological, and spiritual, and I don't shrink from that word in any regard, aspect of it to help you transcend not only the conflict, whether that be physical and threats that are physical against you and your family, but also those that are metaphysical, right? Because eventually we will all face death, right? And to transcend that, right? And to become part of something better. That is what our ancestors valued. That is how they lived, what they prized and what they treasured, and how they built some of the greatest societies and cultures that the world has ever known. All right, guys, that's what I got. Until next time, this is Mark. I'm signing off telling you to stay safe, stay sharp, and keep it Pearl Snap.